Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Hola, bienvenidos, welcome. This is Jerry Tello with the Healing Generations podcast, and we welcome you today to another journey with us in a discussion, in a dialogue, in a plática that brings forth the generations of healing that comes from our ancestors and all the teachings we learned along the way, but also embraces the generations of trauma and difficulty that we want to release and let go and learn from as well. As we begin, I always want to acknowledge Creator and the ancestors, and all your ancestors, all your relatives that have come before you. We want to acknowledge all the people all around the world that we're connected to, all our relations, including grandfather, son, Mother Earth, the Brother Wind, the Water Spirit, Nana Luna, all the creepy callers, Wing It, all of those. And let's acknowledge where you're sitting, the land that you're on. I'm on Tangwa, Gabrieleño land. I acknowledge the relatives there, but then your family as well, your blood-related and love-related family, and you yourself. We thank you for being here and who you are and all that you do, and thank you for joining us today. I'm very pleased and honored to have with us today a comadre, a friend, a colleague, another elder that's been on the path. We've known each other for a lot of years. We've known each other, worked together, did a lot of things together, and really have seen the significant impact that she's had. I'm talking about Sara Mijares, and Sara right now is the president founder of Mundo Maya Foundation. But along the way, she's done so many things for our people, for our culture, for community. Has orchestrated many events, many efforts, been an advocate for indigenous people all across the world, and especially here in the Southern California area. So, Sara, thank you so much for being with us today, and I want to give you the opportunity to welcome the folks that are listening.
Thank you so much, Jerry. It's a great honor to be here with you, Maestro, amigo. And I come from the Mayan land of Yucatan, so I would like to give you the ancestral bienvenida or welcome, and we say, in la quech, ala ken. I am you, you are me. Yo soy tú, tú eres mi otro yo. That salutation of recognizing that the divinity on each other and the fact that we mirror each other, in that respectful, loving way. So I like to say, welcome everybody, and muchas gracias for this space in here.
Thank you, Sara. I wonder if we could begin by inviting you to share about, you and your people, your familia, where you're from, where your people are from, and a little bit about, that journey.
I was born in Yucatan, Mexico, a beautiful Maya land, and I was raised in a half Maya and half Spanish way, okay? I was born in Mérida, but my mom was a teacher, an elementary school teacher, and she traveled from town to town sometimes, and finally wind up in a small village called Muna. And so I typically says that I'm from Muna, Yucatan, because I spent my last 10 years there up to the age of 15 when I came to the United States to join my dad, El Bracero, So in my early years, I was influenced a lot by my mom, by my abuelo Don Teul, he was Mayan, and by both of my abuelas, The Mayas are a matriarchal community, okay? So my two abuelas, both of them were Mayas. On my dad's side, Doña Asteria was very short. She was probably about 4 or 5, okay? But one of the strongest women I know. My abuelo Don Teul, on the other hand, was like 6'7", tall for being a Maya Yucateco,
Wow.
He was a very wise man, a very quiet man. And I always wonder how they came together, okay? Because you had this really short Maya abuela, Maya woman, almost on the controlling side, on the dominant side, And then, so my dad was about the second or third child out of six. And then they live in small villages in Yucatan. My abuelo had a cantina. And I'm being told that when I was a baby and my mom was teaching and my dad was working, my abuelo had one of those beer barrels that cut in half, and that was my play. Okay, so I was inside this big beer barrel, and he would be selling cerveza and everybody there. And then I had these sonajitas that were made of gourd. So he was my first abuelo sitter, per se. It's a man that I really dearly love because I learned so much from him about nature, about time, about all the elements in life that are basic. And my abuela Sara, on the other hand, married a Spaniard. And actually, when I say married, when I've been told that when she was 13, my abuelo, the Spaniard guy, saw her and he liked her. Y se la llevó. Or like we say in the town, se la robó. He was, he took her. And then, so from being in a very small Mayan town, suddenly she's in Merida, the capital, with the family of my abuelo Cusho that were red hair, green eyes, totally the opposite of the Mayan population. Okay, so, and at the beginning, she was really not welcome. She was treated more like what we say, sirvienta, not slave, but somebody that is there to
like a servant?
To serve, yes, a servant, And so I think that some of her behavior, okay, with the children, her children and the nietos were greatly influenced by that. She was a very strong woman, quiet to a point, but and then I always say that she was like the first zorra that I met in the good sense. Like Antonio Banderas is the zorro. But my abuela had a whip, okay? And then if for those people that didn't behave, you better watch out because when she runs after you, if you run, she runs after you, that latigo, that whip would be coming. So I think I was smart because I learned that I would not mess up with it. I would behave. So I didn't want to volunteer for that whip, but so that was those were my abuelos, and Don Cusho was a very nice, loving man. He used to sit down with all the nietos at lunchtime or dinner time, and he always used to serve himself a little copita de Jerez or the liquor, and then he would give us a copita to all of the grandchildren and the children. And my abuela Sara would come. I take my name after my abuela Sara. My abuela Sara would come and says, ¿Por qué les estás dando licor a estos niños? Why are you giving liquor to these children? And my abuelo just closed his eyes and he says, tómenlo antes que venga la abuela. Drink it before your abuela Sara comes, So I mean, all those beautiful sitting down on the table, it's visiting them in El Puerto was really beautiful upbringings. They were both teachers. My mom was a teacher. So I come from a tradition of teachers. And one of the reasons when I was 15 and I graduated from middle school in Yucatan, my father called me to congratulate me. And he says, what do you want to do? And I said, I'll tell you what I don't want to do. Because I had graduated with honors and I had graduated with the one scholarship that the state of Yucatan gives to go to a boarding school, a women boarding school in Jalisco. And I said, I don't want to be a teacher because that scholarship was for teaching. I said, I don't want to be a teacher. I said, I want to be an attorney. And my dreams was I really wanted to study so that I could go to be a consul or an ambassadress in Paris, do a diplomacy work. That was my dream, So that didn't happen. So my second dream became, I want to be a stewardess because I want to travel. And that couldn't be because I was too short. The Yucatecos, as you know, the Maya Yucatecos, we're very short. So you're talking about challenges, short, So I had to find other ways to make a living so that I could travel, and which I do, But those are some of the beautiful memories that I have from my hometown. And then my niñez, my childhood with my friends. My dad started becoming a bracero when I was 3 years old. So we basically grew up with an absent dad. He would visit us for 2 weeks in during Christmas. And I remember he coming from the plane and, coming home with a basket of manzanas from California, the California apples, and then the grapes, And my younger sister would say, "What's Belachi, Manchanich?" Every time we would see my dad, in that children's voice, So we learned to make a living without that dad. And then my dad became like my idol, maybe because of the absence, So and then when he come 2 weeks a year, it's like discipline, we really had to behave, and then he would go back to California. Then we go back to our living. And then my mom again, you have another woman in charge of the household. Going to school with my friends, my memories goes back to when my dad taught me how to read, by the way, when I was 2, 3 years old, But in the first grade, half of the students were Mayan speakers. And then the rest of us come from a bilingual family, Mayan and Spanish, more Spanish. And there was a prohibition of the language. They wanted to do away with the Mayan language, Maya Yucateco, or the Mayatan, as we call it. So the teachers would spank, or they asked the students that were speaking Maya, the Maya speakers, to raise their hands, and then with a ruler, they would spank them. They would hit them, So they started crying. We started crying. And so the ones that spoke Spanish stopped speaking Maya in the classroom so that our friends would not be hit. The advantage they had is that they go back home to continue speaking Maya. We go back to speak Spanish, So, but so that was one of the things that I didn't like, that made me sad. But playing with my friends this was a town that up to the age of 10, I didn't know what electricity was. I didn't know what gas was, So for us, light at night means a candle. Okay. And if you wanted to have warm water when you take a bath, then you go to the well, take your bucket, you lower your bucket, and then you get the water, fill it up with water, and you put it and let the sun, papasol, as we say, to warm it up for you. And then so after school, we go play, but we left our buckets, outside. So when we came back, if we played for too long, that water would not longer be warm, And then another vivid recuerdo is that we had one white towel for a family of 7.
Oh.
Okay, so it was 4 children, my mom, a cousin. There was always a cousin living with us, and my grandfather, Don Teul. So if you play too long, you come back, your water is cold, you go take a bath, and then if you were the 5th, 6th, 7th person to take a bath, you had to get that towel and make sure that you wrinkle it and all the water goes off, and then you dry pat yourself, So when I look at our lifestyles in here, how many towels we have and everything, I always go back and remember that, because that really teaches you that you live and survive with the very basics in life, If we wanted warm water, we had to go get some leñas, or some charcoal, and just do a fire, and then you put it there. That's the same way we cook, So, but my abuelo Don Teul, he always had in the backyard, he always had what we call a milpa. He had planted zucchinis, he had planted potatoes, tomatoes, all kind of herbs, medicinal herbs, mandarinas, corn. And up to today, I tell you, every time I have a bite of a corn, I always remember that taste of the corn that my abuelo, that he planted, and then we could go and pick it because it tasted like earth. And that taste, in my memories, it never goes away. So I always compare the corn with that one, So, and then I remember that every time one of us had a dolor de muela, you had a toothache or a stomach ache, my abuelo would go to the backyard to the patio. And then he says, Sarita, vámonos. And then he would take me with me. And he dressed up with his traditional Mayan, the shirt was manta and the pants. And he always had what we call a sabucan, a little bag around his waist. And that's where he put all the herbs. And when we come back, and then he would boil it or make a paste. And then he put it on your tooth or your tummy, whatever, or make you drink the tea. And then, within half an hour, you're feeling better. So a lot of those teachings, they always stay with me. So when I came here, at least I had that basic, I had those raíces that were so firm. And I remember with my abuelo, I used to say, hey, abuelo, ¿qué horas son? What time it is? My abuelo would go outside and he would point his finger at the sun and he would tell you, hey, son las 12:30. And then you look at a watch, and that was almost the time, you know what I mean? So it just shows you that the Mayans were great observers.
You share some beautiful memories, but they're teachings and they're a base, they're a root for you. And you say when you eat corn, you still remember that because it's part of that genetic memory that you have. It's part of your soul, part of your spirit, and when you think about it, it was probably a struggle. You had to survive. But when you're a child growing up in that, you don't realize the beauty and the riches that you're growing up around and the the knowledge and wisdom that you're getting. So when did you actually move then to the United States?
I was 15. I finished that middle school, la secundaria. So my dad called me and that he asked me the question, what do you want to do? And I told him, I said, I don't want to be a teacher because the scholarship I had was to become a teacher. So he said, you want to come and study here? And then I thought about it, and two reasons prompted me to say yes. One, that there were rumors that he had another woman here. So my mom wanted to come and check him out and stay with him so that there'd be no one else, okay? And then at that time, I had this platonic boyfriend, okay? And when we graduated, he disappeared. And I didn't know where he went or where he moved or anything. So when I look at what do I have in El Pueblo left, and I said, I can't be a teacher, I can't be an attorney. So I told my dad, yes, I will go. So I had this conversation in July of 1968. And 3 months later, on September 28, 68, I crossed the border. Because a month after I had the conversation with my dad, I got an envelope. And that envelope had an airplane ticket to Tijuana and my green card.
Mm.
So I was blessed when I crossed that border with a green card. I was 15. I flew to Tijuana. I didn't know anything. And then so I kind of talked to the guy that was sitting next to me, was an older guy. And when I get to Tijuana, I didn't see my dad and I kind of didn't have patience. So the guy saw me waiting for about an hour and he says, hey, where are you going? I said, well, I'm waiting for my dad, but I don't see him. So he goes, well, I'm going to Los Angeles and you're going to Santana. If you want to, I could drop you off there. And without thinking anything, Jerry, I said, okay. And I got into that car with this stranger. Okay. I guess those were the safer days, So he dropped me off at the restaurant behind the apartment where my dad works. So when I got there, everybody was shocked because my dad was desperate looking for me in Tijuana. So he waited for me for 5 hours and then he calls and he's told, hey, your daughter's waiting here. So needless to say, he was happy but not happy, when we saw each other, And then he lived in an apartment where there were about 10 other people. So that the owners of the apartment had a daughter that was kind of my age. And so they took me to their house for a couple of weeks. They housed me there until my dad got an apartment. So my dad was working as the irrigation in the fields in Irvine. So I get to Santana not knowing a lot of English. And then finally the patron, my dad's patron, gave us a house that it was like, this is like for children's story, It was right in the middle of orange and that grapefruit orchards. It was a little white house like Blancanieves,
Mm-hmm.
And there was orchards, fruits around us. And then about half a mile on the other side, there were plantations of carrots And then that was the Orange County jail.
Oh.
Okay. So that patron would used to come and say, Sara, when you hear that there's some gun sound or something, make sure you lock all the doors because somebody escaped. But it was interesting because I never feared the people in that jail. You know, never ever I thought that somebody would come and harm me. You know, so the biggest challenge I had there was that my dad was an alcoholic, and that when he got drunk, especially when my mom and my brothers visited, they only visited a couple times. You know, that he would get so drunk and he would get into verbal abuse with. I never saw physical abuse, but verbal. He was. I guess all those years of absence had got them distance, you know, but there was always that type of abuse. And then we wind up just running away from the house and going into under the grapefruits and the orange trees. And they'd be there all crying, you know. So and then later on in life, it takes me to during my marriage that one time I found myself crying under a tree and I decided no more crying under the orange tree, you know. But that was the tough part, you know, that it was just my dad and I. My mom came to visit with my brothers a few times, 2 times. And then my oldest brother decided he did not want to come ever again. You know, my dad got him his green card and he just refused to. He says, no, I don't need that, you know. So, and then the other 3 that stay home, they all went to a bacalar, that was a school for teachers. They all became teachers. So if I had stayed there, I was going to be a teacher, you know. So
what did your education? What did you go on to do? Or
so I went to Mission Viejo there. It was a school that was 3 years old, and all this, and there was a lot of Anglo kids. They were the kids of the owners of the ranchos around there. That's why it was built, you know. And then the bus would come by and pick us up, and then I became friends with about 9 of the kids that were the children of the workers, like my dad. And we always sat in the back. So this is a school where 99% was English speaking. And then after a year, and then I chose to go sit in the back of the bus. And during recess, look for my friends speak Spanish. And then at lunchtime, Spanish, and then Spanish. And then I go back home and I get into the churro novelas from Canal 34, or I get into K-Love in Spanish, and it was all Spanish. So a year after that, my dad, that work was slow, and then we moved to LA. And then he looked for a studio next to Belmont High School. And so I switched to Belmont High School. And I get to Belmont High School, and it was during the time of the Cuban refugees. And then the Salvadorian crisis, where the Civil War, there were a lot of Salvadorians, and then some people from Guatemala. So then I'm put into an English as a second language, ESL. So I go to my first class, and it happens to be a Spanish class. And then most of the students were Cubans. The name of the teacher was Mr. Waits, and everybody called him Mr. Wade. So I go to Mr. Waits, and I said, I don't belong in this class. And he says, well, your counselor put you here. I said, no, I don't belong here. I could teach Spanish to people here, you know. And it sounded kind of cocky, but I was really good with grammar and literature in Spanish back home. So I went to my counselor and I said, I'm sorry, I can't stay there. And he says, well, you're going to have to show me your proficiency. So they gave me the county test, and it was like 175 questions for Spanish proficiency, and I only missed 2. So they took me out, because what I realized in that class, Jerry, was that 1 year in a school where all they spoke was English, and I chose Spanish. And in here's a school where mainly Spanish. So I said, I'm in trouble here, you know, and I got to do something. So that year I decided that I was going to divorce speaking Spanish, the Spanish language, that no more novelas, no more K-Love in Espanol. And I had to switch to English programming. Tom Jones and Joe Humperdinck, you know. I fell in love with Tom Jones, you know, with the music. So I learned a new style of music. I would get headaches from trying to force that language into my head, but I stuck with it for 1 year. And after a year, I was comfortable to go back and listen to Spanish again. So now when even with my kids, when they get in my car, I have K-Love, and they said, Mommy or Abwe, can you switch it to English? I said, no way. I earned this. I earned this. So that's one of the things that I'm really proud. So I tell people sometimes you have to stop doing something you like, your comfort zone, to do something, to learn something new.
So your journey actually took you to not only different cultural experiences, but three language experiences too. That one, your base of where you learned your raíces and all your teachings or lessons, Spanish that helped you get through and be with people, but then English in order for you to be able to survive and thrive in the United States. I mean, I know that your work, I mean, in the way that I've known you, you've always been a representative of the community. You've always been an advocate. You've always been a teacher. You've always been an organizer. You've always been about the culture. How did you get there?
Well, it wasn't easy, but I always had this vision that like I said, I wanted to be somebody that works for an embassy or something. So in high school, I took French. When I was in Santa Ana at Mission Viejo, I took a French class. They put me in typing, in cooking, the geometry and all these classes, but I took French and I was doing like a C average. So I was happy with that because I had to go from English to French. So when I get to Belmont, I sign up for French. So I spent 1 month in French. And at that time, I became the president of Le Cercle Français right away. I volunteered for that, okay? So 1 month into the French class, and I was doing good. I was doing like a B+, incredible. So my counselor takes me out of French class, and he says, you have to learn English before you can learn French. So the teacher says, but she's doing well. He says, no, it doesn't work that way. So what I did, okay, I told him, I'm doing good and I feel confident. I'm the president of Le Cercle Français. I don't want to leave the class. So he says, no, Sara, it won't do. So I went and I sat in the front of his door. So every morning he'd come in, he had to kind of jump through my legs to get there. So this happened for a week. And after a week, he signed my return to the French class. So I took 4 years of French in high school. And then I took 3 years of French in Cal State LA because I still had this dream that I could work for an embassy or I could be something that when I traveled that I could feel comfortable, And I had this beautiful vision that I would love to go see Paris, the Eiffel Tower, So it's I always had these dreams. But some of the challenges that I had, like I said, it was more dealing with the alcoholism of my dad. When I was in Santa Ana, sometimes he would start drinking. And then his job was the irrigation of the fields. And then I would watch him. He had to go with this tractor. He had to go get some pipes, metal pipes for the water. And then he would have to place them where in the field and then drop some and then connect them and then drive the tractor, drop more, connect them. He would get up from the tractor, get down, put them together. And I said, Dad, why don't you teach me how to drive the tractor and I can help you? I could barely reach the brakes, but I learned how to how to drive the tractor. So it became easy for him because I drive the tractor. He would be dropping the pipes, connecting them. And then I think he saved about 30% of the time, But that job was really tough because he had to make that every line of the corn or the tomatoes, that all of those ones would come out on the other side almost together because he couldn't close the water main until every surco, as we call it, had fully been irrigated, And sometimes he had to be there 1, 2, 3, 5 in the morning. So it kind of justified that he needed to be a little tipsy to be able to do that. So it was working in the fields. It was really tough, So then we moved to LA, and then he gets a job at a restaurant, and then he works at a Central Plaza Hotel. It's the president at that time, peeling potatoes. Man, he had to peel thousands of potatoes. And then so he became a chef also as well. But But again, the drinking, my dad was the hardest working man I met. I had a lot of respect for his work ethic, you know? He never cheated on anybody. He was always good with people. He was a distant. There was never hugging with my dad. He was kind of distant, but it was just him and I. And then my abuelo joined us, to keep me company for about a year or two. But Friday night comes, my dad goes to the bar next door, and then he would get drunk, and then Monday he'd be ready for a walk. So during those days when he's drinking, it's like I couldn't go to sleep until I see him come in and go to bed. So you start developing certain patterns, like you don't sleep at night, you become an owl, So and those patterns have an effect on your life, on your long time, long-term effects. So that sometimes I still catch myself. Yeah.
I mean, I really appreciate the way that you share that, because I don't think people appreciate the struggle. I put myself in the seat of your dad, being an immigrant man, difficulty knowing the language, having to support a daughter, having to live, having to survive. And we know what it's like now with immigration and migra and the fear and all of that. But in spite of that, having to, work very hard. And how do you cope? His coping was alcohol, and I'm not rationalizing or justifying it, but I think that he worked and he did the best he could. And, somehow he ingrained in you, along with all the abuelitas and all your that sense of hard work. Because the way I know you and the way I met you is you were a worker. You worked, trabajaba, and when I first met you, you had a printing company and doing things, but you were always doing stuff in the community. That besides the work, like your dad, you were always doing something for the community. How did that come about, where you became, because now you represent, the many indigenous people in the community. You advocate for rights. You talk about and lift up, the cultural practices, traditions, medicine, if you will, ceremonies, all of those things. How did you get there? And tell us about the work that you're doing now that is really, that really becomes so beneficial to so many people.
Well, as you know, those of us that are born in indigenous land, in my case, Maya from Yucatan, one of the things that we bring with us is our culture. We leave the place, but we bring the place in our hearts. Salimos de Yucatan, pero Yucatan no sale nosotros. That's how we say in Spanish. And for me, one of the things that was really important is that I come from a land where the embroidery of the Mayan women is one of the way of making a living. And my bisabuelas, my abuelas, the Mayan women in my family, my tias, my primas, they all made a living out of embroidery. My dad was what is called alforzador de alfombras. The guayaberas. He used to make guayaberas. He was a sastre when he was younger. So the clothing for me is symbolic because I wear my clothes, my blusas bordadas, the Yucatan, the Mayan women embroider. And that gives me such a feeling of knowing who I am. Okay? That I know where I come from and I want to stay that way. And that's when our duality, I guess, that confronts us, because part of me, when you talk about, we had a print shop with my former husband, and then that print shop became a vocational, full, federally accredited private institution, vocational. We were the first Mexicanos that had a school, that co-owned a school, that I had to be professional there. I had to wear suits, and dress up professionally. And then on the other side, I have to wear, when I go home or when I go to the community, I wear my blusas, I wear my huipiles. In Yucatan, we call them ipiles. So that identity is so visual. It's so colorful because the color of the embroidery is part of our traditions, our ceremonies, our beliefs, our cosmovision, And so that helped me a lot to stay true to myself of where I come from, where my raíces come from. I never questioned that. So when I used to wear my blusas or my huipiles 30 years ago and walk downtown LA, people ask me, ¿En qué restaurante trabajas? What restaurant do you work? Or are you dancing folklorico? No, I said, I'm not working in a restaurant dancing folklorico. I'm going to a walkout, or I'm going to a huelga, or I'm going to boycott letters, or whatever I had to do. So that helped me a lot. Yeah, that helped me a lot. And then part of that was what I brought home from my abuelo, my abuelas. And the other part was that I was married for almost 40 years to Raúl Mijares. And he was also a ceremonial person. He was the one that started the friendship and the school. But he was the one that brought the ceremonial part at home, because our teachers were Lakotas, and Chief Crazy Bull was one that came and gave us permission to set up that Blue Buffalo Lodge. So in my house, we opened the doors for a lot of abuelos, abuelas, personas de ceremonia. You would come to my house in Swed. We go to all the places. So that ceremonial center was not only a teaching, but a learning thing. And what I tell people is that be open to learn. Be open, have your spirit open, your eyes, your ears, your whole sense open to new things or traditions. Be respectful. So that was part of my essence. So I was able to embrace that ceremonial center. And hundreds of people came through my house. We fed them, but always something to learn. That's one thing that I really like. So in my life, when people ask me, well, if you were to choose something besides mama or abuela, what's your other title? It would be maestra, But I also learned that to be a maestra, sometimes you have to become a student and learn from others, whether children, young people, or elders. Okay. And then teach what you learn, share it, So to me, that's important. And part of what the work that I've been doing is that we started with a small club de Yucatan, and at the same time that I started Mundo Maya Foundation. And the name of it came through a dream. It had to do with my dad. I was traveling in a bus from a Maya town called Felipe Carrillo Puerto in Quintana Roo to visit my youngest brother that lives in Chetumal. And I fell asleep and I heard my dad's voice and say, Sara, Sara, despierta. And when I opened my eyes and I look at the window, we were passing and there was a sign that says Campamento Chiclero. It was a Chiclero camp. So that's when Mundo Maya Foundation was born. Because I remember the stories that my dad would tell me that when he was 13 years old, he ran away from his house and able to make some money. And then he went to the jungles of Quintana Roo, La Selva Maya. And then he would used to tell me the stories about these beautiful sounds of the monkeys, the white monkeys in Yucatan, the birds, everything that was alive, the quetzal, and then the jaguar. And then he says it was paradise, but it was hell at the same time, because they would go there for 6 months. The only woman there was the cook, and she was about 70 years old, 90 years old, They couldn't get out. And then there was a lot of the dengue, the mosquito bite that would make you really sick. Okay. But what stayed with me, it was that beautiful sound, the roar of the jaguar, the quetzal. So when I came back, I started in 2000, I registered as a nonprofit Mundo Maya Foundation. So that was for me like one way to really work with my culture. And then it evolved into an organization that works with Centroamericanos, Salvadoreños, or Guatemaltecos. And then we established a Mundo Maya Day the second Sunday of August. August 9 would be our 8th annual Mundo Maya Day, and everybody's invited. It's at Levitt Pavilion at MacArthur Park in Los Angeles, And with COVID, I think, gave us a good shake up, because it came to show us that life as we know can change in a split second. COVID-19 took out babies, youth, men, women, people die. We were closed in, for over a year, having to live with ourselves. And then unfortunately what happened, a lot of domestic violence got stronger. Child abuse, parents that lost their jobs and suddenly had to be home, and all the financial stress. So a lot of the things got aggravated. Alcoholism became more serious with men, with women, professionals. Like I said, COVID-19 had no respect for socioeconomic or for whether you're working or who you are, And it left us with a lot of mental health illness. And the problem that we have is that the county or the state doesn't have enough Latino or Spanish speakers, doctors or social workers, and mucho menos, at least, indigenous languages.
Yes.
So you have populations, like we have close to 700 or 800,000 Mayas, Guatemaltecos. MacArthur Park is the heart of the Mayas, el corazón de la comunidad migrante Maya, that's MacArthur Park. So we have all these people that they're undercounted, they're served, unseen, silent, like in the shadows. They live in the heart of LA. And sometimes they choose to isolate themselves due to comfort, or other times due to fear, but that the services are not getting to them, And we know that it's important. If your household doesn't get counted with the census, the money that comes from that household doesn't come to the community, So, but they still live in the community, so the resources get depleted sooner. So anyway, I've been part of the LA County Department of Mental Health, the Latino USCC, Latino Underserved Culture Community, for over 12 years. And then we saw that people are suffering, people get into drugs, more domestic violence, more sexual abuse, and homeless, So we put a proposal for the county and for healing circles. And I think that that's where I really took the best of the culture. And then we did a curriculum for healing circles, and we presented it. It went up on an RFP. We put a bid on it, and we got it. So 3 years ago, we started doing healing circles. We were supposed to do 8 of them, for the Mayas, but then we decided that we had to open it for everybody. So we went all the way from East LA to Santa Clarita, at parks, at community centers, to do all healing circles,
Wow.
And so we ran out of money. Right now we're putting up, we're looking for sponsors, but I'm still doing it as volunteer. I go to places that they call me, or I volunteer to do healing circles, and we go because our community needs that.
Yeah. It's amazing to see how, even in the ceremony areas where I've known you, out of nothing you bring something out of, and it always comes from a deep cultural, spiritual place, and representing people that you said don't get counted, don't have a voice, And so, I really said, I want to acknowledge you for bringing the raíces of your people, bringing the cultura and the beauty that, comes across in so many ways, but also bringing the medicine that people need, as we talk about this. I also want to acknowledge another part of you, because I know you personally. And I want to acknowledge your children and your grandchildren, because I know as a abuelita, that's another really, really big part of who you are. And I one of you could just mention a little bit about being a mama and a abuelita, and the pride that you have in that as well.
Well, I have 3 children, Sarita Piedad Mijares, Cecil Mijares, and Raul Mijares the third. Okay. And I'm really proud of my children, and I love my children dearly. And when I look at my children, I had my first child when I was 28, Sarita. And I always call her the experimental child. Most of us are not ready to be parents because we were not trained to be parents. Okay. So you have this child, and I have this child. I grew up very independently. having to live with my dad and the struggles with that. So I had to be very creative. When my dad was drinking, I had to develop a certain culture to be able to survive that, And so I was really in the midst of being a professional woman and trying to do something when my child was born, and having to deal with this and raise the child and work. Sometimes I wonder if I really need to work or not. That's questionable, but I had this beautiful child. And what we bring from our generations is very strong. And we keep it with us, okay? And we develop our own patterns, sometimes good, sometimes not so good here, okay? But 3 beautiful children that are very loving, caring. They give the best of them, professionals that I'm proud of them, And each one of them has 2 children.
So what's their names?
Hugo Becerra, Isabel Becerra, we call her Izzy. They were the 2 elders, 14 and 12. And then we have Liliana Lucia Del Fiume. She's 10, very bright and beautiful. And Leonardo Luca Del Fiume, beautiful. These 2 are, I call them yucahueros because they're as blonde as they could be, my yucahueros. And then my son Raul has 2, the 2 youngest ones, Upqua Pichan. He has a name that says that the eyes of the spirit. Pichan is the soul or the spirit in my Yucateco. And then Ica. So they're 3.5 and 2, I think. Okay, those ones I don't see too often because they live in Connecticut. But I love my grandchildren. I think when I see my nietos, I was blessed because I had cancer, Jerry. I'm a cancer survivor of 16 years ago. And when I was told that I had the cancer, and then at that time we still had the ceremonial center, the Blue Buffalo Lodge, I went to the lodge and I offered sage and prayers. And I said, Creator, I ask you for an extension of my passport of life because I want to be part of my grandchildren's life. Because up to that point, Hugo was born. And from the day he was born, I was taking care of him. And then so I was the nanny sitter, the abuela sitter. And then when his sister was born, the same. But at that time, the other challenge was that, so I was granted after, that could be another chapter, after my survival with cancer, and part of my healing came from ceremony. My son and my daughters brought the medicine man and they did a UEP. And in that ceremony, I felt that part of me had left my body. And then the spirit instructions, my ancestral instructions was allow yourself to go through that surgery and you'll be okay. And that's exactly what happened, And I had cancer stage 3, which is on the not so good side. So I was extending my passport of life. So when I look at my grandchildren, it's like I was given another opportunity by Creator to kind of patch up all those areas where I was really short as a mom. Like making kids wait after school because of work or because of anything. And so to be a better abuela than perhaps I was shortchanging my kids, And I live with 2 of them, with Lilo and with Leo, and I've been part of their life. And to me, that's really a blessing and I feel good about it,
That's wonderful.
When the children are asked to do the family drawing, who are the members of the family, there's Abue there, so that felt, and that when I look at what I do with them, and I'm the chef and they're the chefitos because I cook for them. Dinner is my contribution, and they learn to cook with me, and then they know what I do in the community. Last week I was surprised because when I was going out, I was dressed up with my terno yucateco. And Lilo says, Abu, are you going out? I said, yes, I'm going out. And she says, who's cooking for us tonight? And Leo says, and Leo goes, Alilu, Abu has to go. She's got Mundo Maya Foundation and they do very important work in the community. I said, oh my God, this kid has been listening, So, but they're good,
That's
and
beautiful.
And sometimes when I look at myself at that intergenerational, that other side that looks at the things that I didn't do right as a mom, as a sister, as a daughter, as an ex-wife, um, when I look at that I could have been better things, it takes me back to one Mother's Day. The kids come to me, and then one of them writes a Mother's Day note and says, "I love you, Mom. Happy Mother's Day. You're the bestest mom in the world." And I saw that word and I said, that made me feel good and proud, because she didn't say I'm the greatest, but she said I'm the bestest. Despite my shortcomings, I was the bestest, and that's a good feeling. And then years later, with the vocational school, every month we used to have graduates. And the people that would come there, they were half broken because they had gone through a workers' comp injury, or they were half broken because they were in a juvenile system, and suddenly they had to go through a vocation, And one student that was pretty quiet and nobody could get through him, and through my teaching of graphics, him and I were able to get close. So on the graduation day, he comes and gives me a gift and gives me a cup, and it says, "Bestest teacher." And then I said, "I'm not the greatest, but I'm the bestest."
Yeah.
And then 2 years ago on Mother's Day, I come to my room, and outside the door, there's a Mother's Day note taped in the door. And it says, "Abue, happy Mother's Day. We love you. You're the bestest, Abue."
Really?
And in parentheses, it says, "Don't tell the other one." And then I realized, again, I'm not the greatest, but I'm the bestest.
You're the bestest.
And you know what? That makes me feel really good, Jerry.
Well, I want to congratulate you and thank you, and and as we close this up, because you have had many experiences and many teachings, and and we learn it from many ways, even our mistakes, we learn things. But I want to ask you, as an abuelita, as a nana, as a elder, if you could offer some advice to that next generation, to the young Sara, to the young people that are coming up, what would you tell them in terms of consejos or advice living in this world today?
I would say to be open, be open to learn, be open to teach, be open to accept the differences in people. In ceremony, we say that we have three eyes. We have the left, those of us that have the blessings of the vision, because not everybody has. I have a brother that is blind. But we have the left and the right eye. And then, as the abuela says, we have el tercer ojo, the third eye. And as Abuela Sabina says, always follow your intuition and look with your third eye, okay? And follow that. And we all also have 3 ears, those are ones that have the blessings of the hearing. We have the left ear, the right ear, and you have that ear that is inside your heart. So I say, listen with the ear that is inside your heart, okay? Be patient, persevere, and focus. I was a little social butterfly, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not so good, okay? But focus. And I noticed that people that focus are very successful. If you're an accountant, if you're a doctor, because you develop that technique and you master that, what you do, your profession or your vocation, okay? And then when you master that at your work, you're going to be happy with what you do, Take time for yourself. It's so important. We don't allow time for ourselves. We shower really fast. We eat really fast, So try to live in the here and the now, That's why the healing circles are so important, because in there, we have to detach ourselves from what we don't need and start working lighter, And remember that food is your medicine. Try to keep healthy friends, because in this life, it is so fast, Sometimes we have so many toxic people. And then we have to recognize when we're toxic to somebody, and acknowledge and ask forgiveness, So I say, walk, exercise. It's very important, especially as you get older. And that you laugh, that you love, you live, be compassionate, forgive, and allow every day when you open your eyes and you take a breath of the new day, that is an opportunity to start a new day, a new life. And anything that perhaps you didn't feel good the day before, that you have an opportunity to the rebirthing yourself every morning. And at night, say goodnight with gratitude, So take care of yourself and then listen to your body, Listen to your body. If your head gets hot, if your heart is pumping, you gotta listen to your body and take a step back,
Well, I want to, thank you for one of the bestest podcasts we've had. No, that's beautiful that the teachings that have come from your ancestors and have come from your journey in life, from your children, from the work and just appreciate you. Appreciate you for who you are and what you've done and what you brought and what you continue to do in communities. I think as we close out today, I really want to reflect on that, that sense of bringing your culture, and you brought the consejos of listening, looking with that third eye, the intuitive eye, listening with that intuitive voice. And then if we can do that and honor all people, then the world will be better. So as we complete today, I want to, thank you again, Sara, and thank you all for listening, and take these teachings and share them out in the world, live them out in the world so that you can be the best person that you are. Thank you all very much and have a beautiful day. Elisios.
In oneness, in community.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.